Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Alex here. Today I'm going to talk about my project development process, which is sort of how I might develop a project all the way from an idea to deploying it for the world to see. Now, when I say project development, I mean how I design, develop, and eventually deploy a project. So it's a lot more than just programming something cool. So let's talk about project development. The first step to making anything is to get a good idea. Usually I'll make something that I want to use. So like a very simple HTML5 game engine, or a statically typed extension language over Lua, or maybe a custom Linux driver for a SNES controller. Sometimes the thing that I want to build is something that already exists. And in that case, I pretty much just try and see what's already out there. I might do some research to figure that out. And then I kind of imagine how I might re-envision it and put my own unique spin on something. Also, I notice I always come with a bunch of project ideas after reading about a new language or framework that I really want to use. So I'll pretty much just literally make up an excuse to use that new technology. For example, I once built an algorithm that hashes any file you give it into a donut with sprinkles because I wanted to learn Rust and WebAssembly, and so I was able to do that, and that was a very fun project. So once I've got my basic idea in mind, then I can move on to the planning phase. Planning is the last big step before I get into development on a certain project. If I have an idea that I'm really passionate about, I'll write it in one of these journals. I've got like 6 of these things all full of past project ideas, some of which you've already seen on this channel before. I'll take anywhere between 1 day and a couple of years to kind of plan a project out in my journal. Sometimes I fall out of love with an idea and I'll wait maybe a couple months and I'll come back to it, write some extra lines in my journal, and then once I feel like I have a good enough idea of how I want to develop it, I'll finally go ahead and start building. How quickly I go from planning to developing usually depends on how busy I am that day or how impulsive I'm feeling. In the planning phase, I really try and figure out what are all the features that my project needs. What does it have to do, and do I know how to make it do that? If the answer to that second question is no, then I need to go do some more research, maybe learn some new language or framework or algorithm or whatever, and then I can keep on planning that project. Now, I don't need something to have a lot of features. It's always more important to me that a project's feature set is internally consistent and that the code is very well designed. And honestly, I like simpler systems more than something very complex or bloated. Simpler systems are always just easier to debug and just generally work better. And if a project idea employs some kind of algorithm or concept that I don't know yet, I'll just go ahead and research it a little bit. Research is really great because it helps you figure out the feasibility of certain features, or it can also help you design new ones that maybe you didn't think about before. This is also the phase where I come up with a product's name and logo. Usually I'll take some aspect or feature of the project and I'll kind of contrive a name based on that. Or I'll just pick whatever random name happens to be floating around in my head at the moment. I have a couple of pages in my journals dedicated to random logo doodles. So sometimes I'll just pull from one of those. And sometimes in planning and research, I realize that a certain project either literally just isn't necessary or maybe isn't feasible. And in that case, that's fine. I mean, I didn't waste any time trying to build this project, and I get to reuse the name and maybe some of the concepts for a later one. So the last part of planning right before development is creating a to-do list. Basically, I'll just open up a directory, create a README file, and I can use Git Markdown to make a little checklist in there. And that way, as I'm going through development, I can cross out every little thing that I do. And that gives me this insane sense of accomplishment as I'm building a project. And I find that that usually helps me not get bored as I'm going through and developing some of the features that I'm not as excited to develop as some others. With my to-do lists, I'll either break down my project into various subsystems and then have a checklist for each one, or I'll just have one giant checklist It's really just up to like how I feel that day, and it's up to like the structure of the project. And if I decide to change my mind as to how I want to do my to-do list later, I can always just rearrange it later. So it's not really a big deal. Okay, here we go. Development is the real meat of building any sort of project. I'll always start development after I either have a very solid plan in my head or after I have given in to my excitement and impulsiveness. So my main goal in going through development is I want to get the basic idea of every component or subsystem of my project out of the way, such that I can build dependent components upon that first set of them. And that means I don't need to have everything completely fleshed out. I just want to rapidly prototype, build up in terms of features, and then I can start really hammering in and cleaning up that code. For example, if I want to use a database in some kind of project, I won't connect it to like MySQL or Postgres immediately. Rather, I would create some kind of like little, oh, here's a database manager class or whatever, and I can just wrap a basic dictionary object inside of that and be like, okay, here's my fake database. Just so that way I can build whatever features rely on a database, and then I can connect that to something more permanent later on. And again, this allows me to very rapidly prototype, test the feasibility of certain features, and then I make sure it's scalable after all that. Now, Git and version control in general is probably like my best friend during development. I'll basically just make a new commit every single time I introduce something new to my project, like throwing in a new feature or refactoring something, because I end up doing a lot of refactoring. Git is essentially a checkpointing system for your project. I would recommend making a commit every single time you start working on something that is different from what you were just working on. So like if I go through, make a bunch of random comments, that's a commit. If I work on one little, new feature, that's a commit, so on and so forth. And then you can just go ahead and push that to a remote repository like GitHub after every work session, or maybe if you're paranoid that like your computer is going to stop working. Because sometimes I'm coding and there's like an approaching thunderstorm, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just back this up on the cloud real quick. As I chug along in developing a project, I always find that there's some kind of fault in like my plan, or I have to change some kind of feature, and that's okay. I'll just change my to-do list as needed. It's not set in stone or anything. I might also run into some roadblocks with something that I don't know how to do, in which case I'll kind of take a break from coding and I'll go research and try and figure out how to get something working. I once spent 2 weeks learning the GLL parsing algorithm for some custom syntax highlighting that I wanted to implement. It happens. Sometimes after I run out of excitement on a project, I'll kind of like place it on the back burner. This is usually where projects go to die. However, I have started doing rotational project development. So basically what I do is, let's say I'm working on project A, and eventually I get bored of project A before it's finished. So I put that on the back burner. I start up some new project called like project B or whatever. I work on that for a little bit. When I get bored of project B, that goes on the back burner, and I might put project A back into my main group after I'm no longer bored of it. And I kind of just like rotate ideas out like that. And that way I'm not like forcing myself to work on something that I'm not interested in, and I eventually get stuff done. Also, if I'm finding it hard to focus on any of my projects at all, if I'm just overwhelmed with the size and scope of all of them, I might just start like a very small scope, low stakes project, finish in like a day or two, maybe a week, and then I just feel refreshed afterwards, and that helps reinvigorate my excitement for those larger scale projects. And in addition to all that, I usually develop more than one project at a time. Usually I'll save my main project, or whichever one I'm like kind of blasting through at the moment. I'll usually do that after work on weekdays, and then I'll save a secondary project, one that might require more research or more consecutive time, for the weekends. Yeah, just wherever I can find time to fit in more than one project, I'll just pretty much just do that. But sometimes a project is just too infeasible at the moment for me to work on. in which case I'll kind of stash that away and I'll work on other smaller related projects so that way I can kind of learn how to use that technology. For example, I was developing a 3D game engine at one point with the BGFX graphics library, but I was a little stuck on textures and whatnot. And ever since then, I've been working with OpenGL ES and also WebGL, and I figured out textures in WebGL. So I'm slowly building up the knowledge base to get back into BGFX and eventually release a 3D game engine. So you can just do the same thing and revive projects from your past that maybe use concepts that you didn't quite understand back then. And lastly, for development, because this is a very long section, I want to mention some of my health habits while I code. I always stay hydrated, some water here, because I can't think if my brain is dry. It just does not work at all. Also, I like to take stretch breaks or like do a posture check every so often. I'll look up like stretches for your wrists to avoid carpal tunnel or like tendinitis, because that sucks when you get those. Yeah, that hurts a lot. So definitely make sure you stretch every hour at least. Do posture checks like every 15 minutes, I suppose. But yeah, it's very important while you're programming. Okay, the last major part of project development is deployment. And I usually rush through this section because I'm excited to get onto the next project, even though I really should not rush on this because there's a lot of important pieces going on here. So before I can make a YouTube video or publish a GitHub repo, I gotta make sure my code is both well tested and easy to use by my audience. This includes rewriting my README to probably get rid of my checklist and to make it very instructional and easy to understand by the people who are going to be actually looking at my code. Usually that's all my viewers. I might also want to add a license which dictates how people can use my code. A really good license that I like to use is the new public license version 3, which states that anyone can copy, distribute, and or modify this code provided that they also give a copy of this license along with it. And sometimes I might need to write some like auxiliary code to go on with my project. For example, maybe documentation website. So I'll also have to like get that out real quick. Although again, like I really shouldn't rush on that stuff. And then after I've done all that, I can finally push everything into a public GitHub repository, or maybe I'll share it on like NPM or the Python package manager, wherever I feel like deploying it to. Okay, and that is basically my entire project development process. A user named Devansh actually came up with this idea in my comments, and I elected to steal it. So thank you, Devansh, for this video topic, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. But for Devansh and anyone else who might be watching, if you like this video, please consider giving a like or a comment or subscribing to my channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.